Edward Alexander Crowley was the son of very wealthy parents. His father ran a successful distillery business, but refused to spend any of the money as he believed that drinking alcohol was a sin. He would raise his son to believe that any and all excess was also sinful, and indulgence was the work of the devil. These extreme religious beliefs would set the tone for massive swings in the beliefs and actions of Edward from the outset. Following the death of his father at age 11, Edward fell ill. His uncle took him to live out in the countryside where he would be able to fully explore the extent of the life he'd been missing out on. He developed a love for hiking and mountaineering, which would stick with him for the rest of his life. In an attempt to show Edward a good time, his uncle would also take him to pubs and allow him to drink as a young boy. He even went as far as to buy Edward a prostitute at the age of 15 so that he could lose his virginity. Miraculously, despite these conditions, Edward made a full recovery, and thus was sent back home to live with his mother. But he returned a different person from whom his mother had known. He now fully rejected the religious teachings forced upon him as a boy, and felt the church was responsible for his illness in the first place. Soon after, he would head to Cambridge to study mountaineering and poetry. It was here that he first introduced himself as Aleister Crowley, the namesake of Aleister The Invoker. Upon his graduation from the prestigious school, Aleister would inherit the family fortune and spiral into a life of depravity. Purchasing prostitutes and drugs became a near daily occurrence. He had begun to nurture his interest in Western esotericism early on in an act of rebellion against the teachings of his parents. This would eventually lead to him trying, and succeeding, to infiltrate the Order of the Golden Dawn under yet another false name, this time going by Count Vladimir Zverev. This group of aspiring wizards believed that they could enact real magic and communicate with otherworldly beings by reading from ancient texts and performing rituals. Despite entering the order under a false identity in fear that his pursuits would make their way back to his mother, he was able to quickly rise through their ranks. He took their teachings very seriously, and would often incorporate the use of psychedelic drugs into his rituals to intensify his quest to invoke angels, demons, and ancient gods. The Order grew weary of his interest in black magic, fearing he would use it for evil. They would decide to halt him from continuing to progress within their ranks due to this. Aleister would have to continue his learnings on his own. He would eventually run across a young widow by the name of Rose Edith Kelly, a woman previously betrothed to another man at the hands of her parents. It took Crowley only a single day to convince her to run away and elope with him. On a spur-of-the-moment honeymoon to Egypt, the newlyweds would head to a cave to read from a book called Gotha, the Lesser Key of Solomon, in an attempt to summon the Egyptian god Horus. During the ritual, Rose's head suddenly fell back when she had a vision and heard the voice of the deity. Crowley, having failed to successfully communicate with any entity for years, believed that she was playing a trick on him. To prove she wasn't lying, he brought her to a museum and told her to identify the being that came to her in her vision. Without hesitation, she walked right up to an exhibit labeled number 666 and correctly pointed out a depiction of Horus. Content with this demonstration, he rushed them back to their apartment in Cairo and began to discuss the vision in detail. She claimed that Horus had given her instructions on how to perform a ritual that would allow them to communicate with spirits. Once performed, Crowley heard the voice of Aiwass, his guardian angel, in a whispered voice over his shoulder. The angel instructed him to write down information over the next 3 days, the resulting work becoming the Book of the Law. This would become the central sacred text of Thelema, the occult philosophy developed by Crowley. The Abbey of Thelema housed a great many horrors perpetuated by Aleister. Within this commune, established in an Italian villa, Crowley gathered other like-minded people and taught them the way of the Book of the Law. Adherents were encouraged to do whatever they wanted, including drug use, orgies, bestiality, and animal sacrifice. Within the walls of the abbey sat the Nightmare Room, wherein Crowley would paint terrifying images of demons and witches. He would encourage his followers to take LSD and stare at the images until they completely lost fear of anything. One of these various rituals can be seen in the artwork of Magical Meltdown. Aleister the Invoker stands at the center of a unicursal hexagram, the Book of the Law in one hand and his staff in the other. Within Thelema, this style of hexagram was often depicted with a 5-petaled rose at the center of it. This is a reflection of the phrase, "as above, so below," and is meant to be representative of the interwoven nature of macrocosmic forces in the universe, with the microcosmic forces seen and felt on Earth. In Magical Meltdown, the rose is replaced by Aleister himself, demonstrating the self-centered nature through which he lived his life. There is just one other example of a ritual being performed by Aleister in card art. On Omega Summon, we see Aleister, now merged with Caliga, sitting within a unicursal hexagram at the bottom of the image. Surrounding him are many other hexagrams, creating gateways for the invoked fusion monsters. The original OCG name of this card includes the words To Megatherion, meaning the Great Beast. This was one of Aleister Crowley's mottos, a magical name used to separate a magician's magical identity from their mundane identity within the context of magical work. Caliga has run amok with power, and this will lead to his downfall. After being forced out of the Abbey of Thelema by the Italian government, Crowley fell deeply into a heroin addiction. He would whittle away at the last of his large inheritance and wind up broken divorce due to his infidelity and irresponsibility. Aleister Crowley's search for power had led to his downfall. Aleister the Invoker of Madness shows us the potential outcome of his attempts at invocation. Here we see Aleister partway through his merging with invoked Caliga. In Caliga's artwork, we can see the beast still wearing the robe, scarf, and monocle worn by Aleister. This dragonoid figure is named after Caligula, a Roman emperor known for spending his short reign attempting to increase the power of the emperor and building lavish dwellings and monuments for himself. This being a direct transformation of Aleister is fitting, being that the main tenet of Thelema, do what thou wilt, shall be the whole of the law, indicated that practitioners are meant to do whatever they please, so long as it is the path they feel they are meant to follow, selfish or otherwise. On Crowley the First Prophecyr, we see Aleister still sporting the horns of Caliga, imprisoned in the Grand Spellbook Tower, now being used as an energy source. The stasis tube he is imprisoned in can be seen in Spellbook Star Hall. Aleister is stuck midway between human and beast due to a failed experiment prior to being imprisoned. During the construction of the Grand Spellbook Tower, all knowledge of his forbidden invocations were erased. This monster being the source of the prophecy archetype aligns with Aleister Crowley being the creator of the Thoth Tarot deck, as all of the images depicted in the Tarot deck also have prophecy monster counterparts in Yugioh. The remaining invoked monsters seem to be separate entities from Aleister, though each of them is still impaled by the staff of Aleister somewhere on their bodies, conveying the connection between the beast and the invoker. Invoked Raijin is named after Raijin, the god of lightning, thunder, and storms in Japanese mythology. This god was known for his mischievous nature. In some stories of the birth of Raijin, it is told that he was born out of the corpse of Izanami, discovered to have been twisted and brutalized after her journey to Yomi, the land of the dead in Japanese mythology. This parallels the sacrificial offerings Crowley would attempt in hopes of summoning a deity himself. Invoked Cocytus is named after the river of wailing in the underworld in Greek mythology. In the Divine Comedy, Cocytus is the lake of ice located in the ninth circle of hell. It is divided into 4 descending rounds. Each section is dedicated to entrapping those guilty of being traitors or committing acts of complex fraud. At the center of Cocytus lives Satan, frozen from the waist down. The selection of this river in particular seems aimed at the fraudulent beliefs Crowley peddled throughout his life, likely ruining the futures of many people along his path. Invoked Purgatrio was originally given the name Purgatorio in the OCG. This is the Latin word for purgatory, the intermediary passing space between death and the afterlife, where souls are sent to be purified or purged. The TCG translation of the name is a portmanteau of purgatory and trio, referring to the 3 beings depicted in the artwork. In Catholic doctrine, purgatory is the space in which a soul is cleansed for the final time after having died in a state of grace, and strips them of all but the holiness necessary to enter heaven. This card artwork suggests an inversion of that concept, stripping the soul of all but is necessary to complete these rituals, leaving only the monstrous beast shown to us. Invoked Megallanica is a reference to Terra Australis, a hypothetical continent displayed on maps between the 15th and 18th century. The existence of this landmass was not based on any actual observation, but rather the idea that there must be land present on the opposite side of the globe to balance the Earth. This theme of balance shows up frequently in Thelema. Invoked Ogaitis is named for the Greek word used to describe the astral body described in mysticism. It is often portrayed in reference to a soul's ascent to an afterlife. This being the only invoked monster that requires a fusion monster harkens to this idea of the transcension to a higher form. Invoked Merkaba is named after Merkava mysticism, an early school of Jewish mysticism. These beliefs centered around the visions described in the book of Ezekiel in the Hebrew Bible. In these verses, Ezekiel describes a chariot made of heavenly beings driven by the likeness of a man. The wheels of the chariot are formed of angels described as rings inside of rings, known as ophanim. These angels are part of a class of celestial beings said to tirelessly guard the throne of God. The word Merkaba can also be broken down into 3 parts and translated to Mer, meaning spirit, Ka, meaning light, and Ba, meaning body. When strung together, the word means a spirit or body encircled in counter-rotating rings of light that are capable of transferring the body to different realms. And finally, Invoked Elysium, named after the Elysian Fields, a conception of the afterlife developed over many Greek religious and philosophical sects and cults, and still held by some today. Who could enter the Elysian Fields was said to have been decided by the gods, the righteous, and the heroic. This could reference the story of Crowley's death. Crowley fell into a coma just before he died. The sky lit up in a cacophony of thunder as the gods came to reclaim his soul. At the end of his life, Crowley eventually remarried, and would go on to have a son who he named Aleister Crowley. This boy became Crowley's purpose for being, and it filled him with regret to think back on the ways he had acted in his life leading up to that point. After a lifetime of believing that the pursuit of selfish desires were the only way to obtain purpose, he cast those ideas aside and recognized that true happiness and fulfillment came from his family.